when those parents heard that, they went and looked for a better message, and they got it from groups that were proposing alternative treatment. Measles causes it in about 1 per 3,000. The vaccine causes it at, I think the number I've seen was 1 for 24,000. Before the vaccine, we had tens of thousands of cases of paralytic polio every year. With the vaccines, we had 6 to 10.
So yeah, I also wanted to ask you about some of the claims that have been spread by RFK Jr. I know you usually or mostly talk about mandates, so if any of it's like outside your area of expertise, just let me know. The first one, the big one, is connecting vaccines with autism. People on my channel know I'm a behavioral therapist, so I work in the autism community. So I usually go at that from my side. So I'm curious, from your side, has there ever been any veracity, anything? Can you speak to vaccines and autism, why it's even a discussion, if it should be a discussion now, and that kind of thing?
1990s, people decided to change the definition of autism, broaden it dramatically, to get more help to children who had special needs but were not diagnosed and were not getting it. So they dramatically broadened the definition. But I don't think you're a behavioral therapist. You probably have more education than most doctors on it. A lot of doctors weren't educated about it. So when parents of children that were now diagnosed with autism went to the doctor, they heard from the doctor, there's no hope, institutionalize this kid, they'll never grow better. And by the way, that was not true for many of the newly diagnosed kids. Some of them still had severe disabilities that would interfere with their ability to do certain things in society. Some of them were not. And as a reminder, we can improve our society a lot for people with disabilities, and we aren't doing it.
Yep.
So when those parents heard that, they went and looked for a better message, and they got it from groups that were proposing alternative treatment. And a lot of these groups were blaming vaccines. And the alternative treatment they gave were chelation, removing heavy metals, because they blamed heavy metals in vaccines. There were a number of things that came together to increase the belief that it was vaccine. There was in English a doctor that blamed MMR. There were in the US parents who blamed thimerosal, a mercury-based preservative. But from a parent's point of view, these are the groups that not only gave them hope, here are the treatments we have, it's a vaccine injury, etc. These were also the groups that helped them navigate the system. So these were parents group that, for example, told them this is how you can get your child a special education plan and so forth. So when you're hearing vaccines cause autism from the people that are actually helping you and offering you meaningful hope, you need to believe it, because these are the people on your side and they really are helping each other. Your community believes that vaccines cause autism. So the scientific community is outside. These are the people that deny you hope. The problem with that is, aside from the fact that it's not true, that blaming vaccines creates a lot of anger and bitterness in those parents. They feel that they've been tricked, etc. The vaccines cause autism group and other people who blame vaccines for things that happen to the children are very angry, very bitter, very mistrustful. So they're kind of a mobilized army. It's burning in their bones. They want to fight the evil people that hurt their children. And when RFK Jr. taps into that, he knows he has a group that will stand behind him no matter what. And he has every interest to feed into their misinformation. So I don't think there was ever good evidence of that connection. It's worth studying. It was important to study. But there were a lot of things that made this a powerful group that was very passionate, and for very good reasons, because these people cared about the children and wanted to fight for the children, was willing to fight and go to war and devote all the resources to combating this. This is what Kennedy is tapping into. And we're not going to convince people for whose community has been built around vaccines cause autism that that's not true.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I completely agree. I always say it's the same. It's not vaccines that have caused an autism diagnosis to become more common. It's the fact that we understand it a lot more. Like the number he points to often is like autism used to be diagnosed as a rare form of schizophrenia. So then he'll quote like this 1 in 10,000 number or something, and it
Yes.
wasn't even diagnosed as its own thing when it was like that. So a bunch of misnomers, kind of on that, but maybe broadening it. Was there anything, or could you speak to maybe in the history of vaccines, has there ever been these kind of negative effects or side effects that they've led to?
Yes.
And then even more importantly, could you go into like the risk benefit kind of that goes in with any
Yes.
medicine, and how it is for vaccines?
So first of all, anything that works on our body is going to have a risk.
Yep.
Anyone that tells you that something that works in your body is 100% risk-free is selling something and probably lying to you. Um, Vaccines have risk. Pretty much every vaccine, for example, has a risk of generating an allergic reaction. An allergic reaction is an immune reaction, and um, some vaccines have a bigger allergic reaction risks. Those are vaccines that have gelatin, for which is about 1 in a million. But any vaccine can lead to an allergic reaction. Most vaccines also have other risks. So for live virus vaccine, they will have a much lower rate of the risk of the disease. So for example, for measles, um, one of the risks of measles is ITP. I don't know how to say it correctly, but it's a platelet disorder that makes your body not create platelets enough, which means that if you get injured, you might not clot, and it can be very dangerous. Measles causes it in about 1 per 3,000. The vaccine causes it at, I think the number I've seen was 1 for 24,000, and it's from the vaccine is short-lived. It's about 6 months, and then it goes away for 90% of the people. But while you have it, it's a serious disorder.
Mhm.
So there are several vaccines that have risk, but by and large, they're a lot smaller than the risk of the disease. So, for example, let's talk polio. Polio has two vaccines. One is the one we get today in the US, which is the injection, the inactivated virus, where they essentially kill the virus with chemicals. Polio, the wild virus, causes paralysis in about 1 per 200.
Mhm.
The oral live polio vaccine, in about 1 in 2 or 3 million, reverts back to the wild form and causes paralysis. So 1 per 200 versus 1 per 2 to 3 million.
Yep.
That's the risk. It's still a real risk. If you're that family, then it's bad,
Mhm.
but it's a much lower risk. So when we use the oral polio vaccine in the US, before the vaccine, we had tens of thousands of cases of paralytic polio every year.
Mhm.
With the vaccines, we had 6 to 10. And the same is true for pretty much every vaccine. It varies for each vaccine, but for each of them, the risk of the vaccine are going to be an order of magnitude smaller than the risk of the disease, or the vaccine won't make it to market.
Yep.
Still, they have risks. And by the way, one of the reasons I think it's really important that we have a no-fault compensation system for vaccines is that because vaccines don't just protect the individual, they're also a public good. I think it's really important that the rare people that are harmed by the vaccine are compensated quickly and generously for all of us, because it's fair, because they've done something that benefits the whole society, and because I think people will trust more in the system if there's fast, generous compensation.
So there's two questions I want to take from that. The first is, I guess in comparison to other medicines, because I know this is also true for like
Yes.
Tylenol and things like that. Is it
Mhm.
like it's no more, you don't see the risk so much higher in vaccines? It's similar to like what you would see in something as mundane as Tylenol, right?
In fact, it's lower because vaccines are given to healthy people. We have very low tolerance for side effects. So, for example, in the 1990s, there was a new vaccine for rotavirus, which isn't the one we use now.
Mhm.
And that vaccine caused a very serious side effect, intussusception, where the intestines essentially turned inside out in 1 per 10,000. And
Mhm.
it was taken off the market because a serious side effect in 1 per 10,000 is too high for tolerance
Mhm.
because it's in healthy people. So, yes,
And then the other one is just about COVID. COVID's the vaccine that, there's always the conspiracy. So I have to tie it
yes,
in. Myocarditis is the one that's usually brought up with COVID. From
yes.
my research, what I've seen is it's, like you said, a lot lower in the vaccine than it is if you were to just get COVID. Is that your understanding as well?
Yes, though I'll qualify it.
Okay.
So the initial series caused myocarditis with the risk being higher in a specific subgroup, uh, adolescents and young men. There's a question, and I think it's an open question for that first series, whether let's say you have a 14-year-old that already had COVID.
Mhm.
In that case, there might be a question which one has higher risk, because that kid already has some immunity from the disease. They can get better immunity from the vaccine, but it's a question, is that worth the small, even the small risk? But I will add that there's no indication that it's still a risk from the boosters. That myocarditis, so if you have a teenager that already had the primary series, we're not seeing the signal for myocarditis from the boosters. So I would say generally the risk of myocarditis for variety most people is a lot smaller than the risk of not vaccinating.
Mhm.
But for one subgroup, there might be a question.
Yeah, that's perfectly put. The last kind of RFK Jr. centered conspiracy that I wanted to ask you about was he often brings up the childhood vaccine schedule. And, he'll say there was this many when I was a kid and now it's exploded to all of these. Could you explain to why, to the extent there is more, why it would be necessary and how the schedule is still seen as safe and effective?
Yes, so three things. First of all, Mr. Kennedy tends to play with the numbers a little bit. In other words, he tends to uh, undercount the vaccines he was given. Given his age, I'm guessing, I haven't seen his vaccine schedule, he probably got the smallpox vaccine, which is, by the way, a lot more dangerous than modern vaccine. We don't
Mhm.
give it anymore because we eradicated smallpox. It's gone. The oral polio vaccine, which has the risk of 1 in 2 to 3 million paralysis, which isn't a risk that the injected vaccine has. The injected vaccine is a lot safer. And he probably also got the DTP vaccine, the diphtheria. So he got probably at least those three, but he got them in multiple doses. So when he said I got three vaccines, he's ignoring the fact that each of these vaccines was a series.
Yeah.
So, for example, you get at least 4 doses of the polio vaccine. So he's
Mhm.
not counting that. He's counting just three. Today, we have more vaccines for two reasons. One, the technology improved. We can make more vaccines against more diseases. And two, we've lost our tolerance for risk. Remember, in the beginning of the 1900s, infant mortality was high. A lot of babies were dying. Uh, as this decreased, we are a lot less used to our babies being sick at all, and we have less tolerance for diseases. So we want to protect them against more disease now that we can do that. Now, you asked correctly, how do we know the schedule is safe? So every vaccine added to the schedule the manufacturer has to do two kinds of studies. The studies we talked about, the licensing studies, but also something called concomitant studies, which means they have to show they're safe on the schedule. That's for infants, not
Mhm.
always for adults. Adult vaccines are a little different, but we really care about babies. So, new childhood vaccines have to go through concomitant studies as well, showing that they're safe in combination with other vaccines. So in those studies, you take a group of children, not the children that were in the trial, you give some of them the regular schedule and some of them the regular schedule plus this vaccine. And you look at adverse event across them. And they have to be about the same. So in other words, you have to show that aside from achy arms, which a new vaccine can always cause more of, the new vaccine is safe with the schedule. And we have those studies going back decades. So we don't just add vaccines to the schedule without studying the effect. Um, and we have studies of vaccine combination even after the fact. So, for example, when a question came up in the 1990s or 2000s, do vaccine cause asthma and allergies? You had studies of vaccine combination, DTP and MMR and so forth. So you had studies looking at specific questions because sometimes questions come up after the vaccine is licensed. You say, well, we didn't, in the trial, we didn't see a signal for asthma, but now people are saying maybe the vaccine caused asthma. So let's go study it.
Mhm.
So we do additional studies of the specific claim, just as you said we had with autism. When claims came up that MMR causes autism, large studies were done very fast in a lot of countries. We now have studies in millions of children with MMR or without MMR to see if it causes autism, and the answer is a very resounding no across these studies. So that's the answer.